All right, well, good morning, everybody. I'll be doing some quick opening remarks ahead of our keynote, which is something I'm very much looking forward to. But my name is Rahul, CEO and founder of NordSpace. I want to thank you all for being a part of the inaugural Canadian Space Launch Conference today. We didn't plan for this conference to turn into what it has today, but honestly, looking at all of you, it's incredible, it's astounding. We initially planned for this conference to attract maybe about 75 people, regulators, policymakers, and such, and sort of get everyone on the same page for once a year, one roof. It's such an important and challenging mission. Really, the only way to make this happen is if we get everyone on the same page. We tried to pitch this idea to multiple space conferences to just have a single session related to space launch, given just how important a piece of the value chain it really is. But for years, everyone really said no. And that seemed like a representation, really, of the state of launch in Canada in general to us. A complete aversion, really, to doing something new, to standing our own two legs, to taking a risk, to being bold for once, and for really caring about sovereign capabilities here in Canada. So just like many other things, we had to take the initial first steps here and organize this gathering after our 16-plus hour work days, sweating bullets in the summers and getting consumed by black flies, or freezing our butts off in the winter and fending off moose and bears, all just to get one more engine test in and bring Canada one step closer to space. So, we have rocket fuel running through our veins. We eat, sleep, breathe, dream this stuff. We're going to make this happen as a country. But we had no idea that so many of you also felt the same way, and that's why you're all here today. You're also generous with your time, with your expertise, and everything else coming here from all across Canada and even outside, and we couldn't be more grateful. This is the approach we believe that we must take, a Team Canada approach to make sovereign launch capable and possible in Canada. There are precious few opportunities like these that we can take advantage of in our life to do something really, really big. Something that has the potential to leave a legacy, to realize a dream, to ignite and unite the spirit of an entire nation, and to capture the imaginations of young and old. We all have this opportunity now with launch to be a part of something that every single child in Canada can point to as a shining example of what's possible and say, if they can launch a rocket to space, we can do anything. To be a part of something that every Canadian can really feel is their own victory, something that we all can own and celebrate for generations, to create thousands of jobs, hundreds of new technologies, to defend our people, to protect our beautiful environment and our lands here on Earth. Space brings out the best of us, and it's time now more than ever for Canada to build ourselves into a more resilient nation in space and a more capable ally for our friends. That starts by getting there, by building the road to space. Assured access to space is becoming commonplace around the world, from Norway and Germany and Sweden, New Zealand and Australia and beyond. But the difficult truth is that Canada is far behind. The Canadian Space Launch Conference is meant specifically to turn that tide and ensure our nation becomes a spacefaring one, a true spacefaring nation, and close this gap in Canada's value chain in space. So we thank you again sincerely for your participation today in this inaugural and historic conference, and for building Canada's future in space, and welcome again. We note with respect that this conference and historic venue is located on the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. The Algonquin people have inhabited and cared for these lands since time immemorial, and we take this time to express our gratitude and respect to them as we extend their legacy with our sights set on the stars. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now my honor to introduce Brigadier General Chris Horner, Commander of the 3 Canadian Space Division. He's our keynote speaker, and since joining the Canadian Armed Forces in 1998 as an aerospace controller, General Horner has forged a remarkable career, culminating in his leadership of Canada's space operations. A graduate of the Royal Military College of Canada, he holds advanced degrees in defense management and leadership, and is an alumnus of the Canadian Forces College and U.S. Air Force War College. His extensive operational experience includes nearly 1,300 flight hours off the E3 AWACS with 430 combat hours supporting missions such as Operation Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and Noble Eagle and counterterrorism. General Horner has commanded critical units including the 5-1 Aerospace Control and Warning Squadron and the Canadian Joint Warfare Center, and held strategic roles at NORAD, National Defense Headquarters, and as Deputy Joint Force Cyber Component Commander. Promoted to Brigadier General in 2024, he now leads our 3 Canadian Space Division, driving Canada's defense strategy and advancing its role in allied space operations. A visionary leader, a dedicated family man, and my team and I at NordSpace feel comfort and safety knowing that General Horner is eliminating threats we may never know about as civilians, but his efforts allow us to complete our own mission for Canada. Please join me in thanking General Horner for his service to our nation and welcoming him to the stage.
What an epic venue, right? To be able to be here and see the birthplace of aviation while we talk about how we move forward as a country into space. And we've gone to space, and we've been in space. But we're gonna go back, and I think we're gonna go back with a vengeance. Am I allowed to say vengeance? Probably not. Hey, so thanks, folks. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being part of this, and thanks to Raul and the team for putting this on. It is an incredibly important event at an incredibly important time for Canada. And as you know, we had an election last night. I don't know if anybody was tracking that part. And because it was an election period, had to be very careful about being able to be out in public as an official from the Government of Canada and what I was allowed to say. And they asked that my speech be prepped in advance and approved, and so I didn't write one. Instead, I scribbled on my notes here, so I got my policy advisor to try to read it, and he said he couldn't, so I took that as we're good, and we're moving on. So one of the reasons Raul asked me to be here is based on, I think, a story I told at Spacebound last summer. I loved rockets as a kid. And if you've heard this story, bear with me, it's only a couple minutes. And I loved rockets because of their power and what they meant and what they represented. And as a 12-year-old, I was dabbling in what I would call rocketry. And in doing that, I accidentally lit my neighbor's house on fire. And I'll explain why. It's because I, again, as a 12-year-old, was given model rockets with not a lot of parental supervision, which is, I love my parents, and I'm so glad they gave me that type of oversight. And I found my dad's collection of fireworks, and I thought, fireworks are cool, rockets are cool. I bet if you hollowed out the inside of all of these fireworks and put them in a rocket and launched it, you could produce a pretty high altitude show. And so I did that. And it went about 15, 20 feet in the air. I didn't know a lot about physics or math at that point, and it sort of lobbed gently and nicely fireball over the fence onto my neighbor's back porch and yard and exploded in a spectacular display of amazement as I ducked for cover and watched the back of the house catch fire. And the police came and explained to me that that's not really what we do with rockets. And so being an interested kid in rockets, I was told I wouldn't do that anymore. And instead the next thing I did was find a pretty long black piece of plumbing pipe and decided if you built a rocket inside of that, and then you carried it to the park and you shot it from your shoulder, again as a 12-year-old, that also gets people's attention. And so it's no wonder I didn't become a rocket scientist, and instead I joined the military and blew things up for a living. But here we are. And so why am I here? And why did Raul ask me to talk? It's probably not about arson and how to burn your neighbor's house down. But as we look to the future from a space perspective and what it means to be a sovereign nation, there's two things I want to talk about. First thing is the mission focus areas for defense in space. And then the space life cycle or value chain that I think was talked about, and why it's important to me as a practitioner of warfare and how we think through that from an economics perspective in Canada. So first, let's talk about mission focus areas. Traditionally, I would expect that you think that I do the detection of threats to Canada, be that maritime approaches, aerospace approaches, and space, and the space domain, which is true, we do that, and then deter our adversaries from conducting things that would not align with our beliefs, not align with the way we want to conduct ourselves as a nation, maybe put threats on our sovereignty. And then if necessary, and only if necessary, defend against those threats that are coming at us. And it's important to know that as I talk through this, again, guy in a uniform, space warfighter, doesn't really want war in space, wants to avoid that, wants to stop at the detect and deter phase. So I don't want you to think that I'm here, absolutely waving the flag and saying that the Outer Space Treaty of 1967 isn't important. It's incredibly important. And what we want to do is preclude those kind of activities in space. But frankly, I can't say we've done a great job in that. There are adversaries around the world who continue to put weapons in space or threats to space, which threaten the critical infrastructure of this nation. And as that critical infrastructure is threatened, and Canadians rely upon space like they never have before, with a sense of, I think, naivety, if I can go down that road, that we don't truly understand how much our economy, our sovereignty, our logistics supply chains, our banking cores, how we function as a society, what you download or stream on Netflix, all of those things are tied through the space domain. So everything in the space domain, in my opinion, becomes critical national infrastructure. And it supports other elements of critical national infrastructure. So when we talk about the defending phase, it's really important for me that our defense policy from 2017, Strong, Secure, and Engaged, gave us an ability to do defend and protect, and gave us that ability to look after the critical infrastructure of Canada. And we do that 4 ways. One is from space domain awareness, and that is really understanding what is going on in space. It is beyond situational awareness, it's beyond that. So some people will talk about SSA or space situational awareness. It's important, but domain awareness also incorporates elements of intelligence and ability to act and operate in the domain, to control and run away bravely if necessary to protect assets, or do other types of operations to allow us to maintain sort of a coherence as to what's going on in space. We do a lot of space-based intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and that's a lot of Earth observation by another name, and that is allowing us to understand what threats are out there terrestrially and how we monitor that from space. We have a lot of SATCOM as a mission area. We have a long history in this country of being satellite communications capable and using that to our advantage to project power forward, to enable our joint force, but also having to protect the joint force forward by giving them command and control from a distance. And the last thing is space control. And this is a pretty new mission area. But space control is fundamentally based around the ability to operate, dominate, and control the domain. Now, sounds scary. Sounds like a crazy person on stage wants to militarize space. Got it. We do domain control in the maritime domain. We do it in the aerospace domain. When we do it in the land domain. And we're just starting to have these conversations now around, hey, our adversaries are doing some pretty squirrely things on orbit, and we should have the capabilities and ability to take action, offensive or defensive, to do that. And we're going to need to shape some language as we provide advice to government over the next little while about what does that mean from a Canadian perspective. No, that doesn't mean blowing things up in space. We enjoy the responsible use of space, but we want to be able to deter an adversary from subjugating us, from economic extortion, from threats to our sovereignty. And we need to do that by gaining some control of the domain. And so let me transition from more scary to less scary. Space control requires a couple things, but one of the things that's important and why you're here is resilience. And what launch gives you as a nation is resilience. So this isn't about putting weapons in space, it's to be able to put something back into space if an adversary takes it out of play. It's an ability to tactically deploy a space capability to enable the joint force for a specific period in time and space, and then deorbit that capability so we're not creating additional space debris. It's an ability to do things like in-orbit servicing and maintenance or rendezvous proximity operations. It depends on what parlance you want to use. So that when we have satellites that are no longer required, we can deorbit them properly, or we can maintain and extend the life of capabilities that are on orbit. But to do that, you have to understand the value chain as a nation. And to do that, you have to understand how resilience plays into, how launch plays into that resilience piece. And so when I think of the value chain for the space economy for this country, there's probably different ways to look at it, but for me, there's 8 pieces of it. And we're good at lots of them, but not all of them, right? So it starts with the conceive phase, where we conceive of the things that we will need as a country. And I'm surrounded here by incredibly bright humans who are conceiving and designing incredible things. And I look around the room, and I've spoken with quite a few of you this morning about where you are in the conceive phase, or to the second phase, which is the design phase, right? You've conceived of an idea of how do we fix this, and we've now designed a capability. And then we've got to build that capability out. And that's number 3, build. And then number 4 is launch it. Because a space capability doesn't do a lot of good if it's not in space. And I think that's probably why you're here, right? So we're kind of missing number 4. And traditionally, we've used other countries to launch our military capabilities into space. In 2025, I would argue that we're going to have a really hard time doing that with our future military capabilities. The geopolitical situation isn't what it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. It's not what it was 10 months ago. And as we look at that as a nation, one of the things that we have to consider is, how do we generate that sovereign or nationally separable capability to allow us to fulfill that step in the value chain? Because then you get to launch, and you launch from a sovereign site with sovereign capabilities and put sovereign assets to defend and protect the citizens of this country. And I think that's important. And then once something's in space, you got to operate it, and I think we've got a long history of that. There's a few organizations and companies across this country who've done that for a long time. And then we talk about maintaining, right? It's not just TT&C and station keeping. It is, can I refuel? Can I maneuver without regret? Can I deorbit on demand to clean up space a little bit? Those are 3 things I think about a lot as I look at future space operations from a military perspective. It is really expensive to build high-end capability to go into space. It is less expensive to create a box full of fuel and go up and figure out how to refuel that. Again, I'm not the rocket scientist. I proved that in the early story. There's some significant physics and math involved in that, and I applaud you for working on that problem. But it is certainly cheaper than trying to develop an entire new bespoke national capability or national technical needs. And so we need to think through that maintenance piece. And maybe that maintenance piece is on demand. And maybe that is part of that resilience where, hey, I have a failing satellite and I can launch something quickly to go fix it. Notice I said the word launch something quickly and not have to wait in line in an already overburdened launch schedule in another part of this continent to put something into space. So I am concerned about that. And then we talk about the repair or recover or reorbit, and we talked about that. And then the last piece is learn. And what do we learn from that value chain to get us back to the conceive phase to build that cycle again? And so, I think we're missing 2 or 3 things out of that. But one of the fundamental things I think we're missing as a nation is an ability to be responsive in launching, which gives us resilience as a nation. And that resilience piece is incredibly important, and I can't stress it enough. The work that you are all working on to create spaceports or launch vehicles or TT&C ground infrastructure, or the science behind how do we do space control operations by a different name, is what's going to set Canada apart in the future. We have had an incredible history as a spacefaring nation. We have developed technology for 40, going on 50 years that has enabled us to have communications across this country and put suborbital rockets up for decades. And we're in a position now, I would argue, to be back there. And not like back with 1970s technology. There's a few people in the room who I've operated with in uniform who flew 1960s and 70s technologies. Hey, Colin. I'd really like to not fly 1960s and 70s technology tomorrow. But the leading edge work that is being done right now in the Canadian space ecosystem is actually enabling us to leapfrog some of our allies and partners globally. And I think that continued investment in the space sector will allow us to accelerate that forward. There are lots of folks that are going to talk to you today about different aspects of policy or regulation or investment and what that means and what that has meant from different partner nations. What I can tell you is that we are truly at a launch point for the future of Canada. And I'm incredibly, incredibly honored to be here to be part of this conversation, because as I go back to, being that kid who accidentally lit his neighbor's house on fire, the excitement of watching a rocket launch from this country will bring me back. The capability that will deliver as a nation will increase our sovereignty, our security, and our economic prosperity. And I fundamentally believe that. And so it is a daunting task. There was once a time when Canada didn't have airports and we didn't have airplanes. And we decided, hey, this is a big country. We should probably be able to move people easier than the train. Some crazy people built these airplane things that you get in and you fly and it's faster and you land on these strips of grass that they call airports or aerodromes. We're there. We are 100 years ago and moving that forward now in space. We're on the precipice of spaceport capability. We're on the precipice of sovereign, ITAR-free launch capability. And we are at the precipice of unlocking a $40 or $50 billion space economy over the next 50 years. And I fundamentally believe that. And so I know I have, there's a clock ticking down, and I think that's my remaining time, and so I'm conscious of that. Either that or we should all run away in 13 minutes. But I know Raul wanted me to leave a little bit of time for questions, and so with 13 minutes to go, I just want to say one thing, and then I'll turn to questions. None of this is possible for the future of this nation without your work. And the struggle part is hard. The struggle part is because we are creating things from whole cloth that we've never done before as a nation, the struggle will be hard. From understanding and breaking through regulatory frameworks, and I know my Transport Canada friends are here somewhere, they are doing the lion's share of that. There they are right there. They are doing epic work to accelerate that. There are engineering students who I've met who are creating capabilities that we never conceived of before, that will be the next generations of engineers and leaders. And so where are the engineering students who are here? There's like a half dozen of you. Amazing. Keep doing the hard work. Failed engineer, failed rocket scientist, crazy lunatic space warfighter. It all works out in the end. And with that, everything you do is important. This is going to be really big for this country, and I can feel it, and I love it. And I love what you do, so thank you for doing what you do. And I'm happy to take your questions. This is going to be really hard. Person in the back that I can barely see.
You briefly mentioned ITAR. Are ITAR restrictions applicable to Canadian developments?
I don't really know how to answer that question. I think that ITAR restrictions are always challenging for a procurement process, and I'm not a procurement expert, but they shouldn't be challenges to homegrown domestic engineering and production or the creation of sovereign capabilities. And I could be completely wrong, but that's, again, that is not my area of expertise. But I'm happy to give that a shot and go on record as saying, it shouldn't be a problem. There is a question somewhere over here. So I think I got like 30% of that question.
I'll just do it again then.
Thank you.
Okay. So everything that we're doing today is regarding the launch. My question to you, sir, is how much emphasis is the Canadian government looking to the crew, the people that are going to, the education side of things, that will then enable us over the next 20, 30, 40 years to actually grasp the opportunity that is in front of us?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and the real answer here is, while I wear a uniform and I represent the government, I'm not sure what the new government's going to want to do because they got elected 6 hours ago. And that, I'm not trying to be joking, there's some shaping that is required and some advice to government from multiple government departments that will be required in part of this transition to get to that. But let me go back on what I said about being at the start of this journey and needing us to have the engineering talent developed. And Adam is here from Launch Canada. I got your name right this time. I screwed up the last two times, so I'm good. I feel good about that. I wrote it down. It's Adam. Think about where Launch Canada was as a nonprofit a couple years ago. Think about the number of folks and number of schools that are involved in that now. I think you're starting to see that. I'm starting to see growth there. I think as we grow out the ecosystem broader, focused on what the government accepts as advice and the direction they want to take it, you will absolutely see kind of a full spectrum of investment all the way from that conceive phase, which is back in the academic institutions, out to how do we do things on orbit. And so I can't give you a clear answer because I don't know what government's going to do. I can say that there's certainly quite a few government agencies and partners and departments who are crafting their advice to government currently for the transition that will focus on why Canada needs to be a spacefaring nation again, and the importance of that from an economic perspective and a sovereignty perspective. And I think collectively that advice will turn into action, and that action will be across the board from investment in Canadian infrastructure, Canadian companies, and academic institutions to grow the next generation of engineers and folks who are going to have to build this forward. Over there first, is that what you're saying? Okay, sorry, go ahead. This table here, that I might be able to hear you. Is a sovereign P&T capability of strategic relevance for Canada? That was your question. I'm not sure. We're pretty reliant on GPS, and yes, there are challenges in the Arctic, and I think if you were to forecast 10, 15 years from now, there will likely be some form of sovereign capability to help support operations in the Arctic. I mean, the last two defense policies have specified that the Arctic is absolutely a place that we have to spend time and resources to ensure we defend and protect. There are discussions around, do we need to accent the current types of PNT or GNSS constellations that exist to support those operations? And analysis has said, yeah, we probably do. I don't think we're at risk of losing access to the GPS constellations as they are now. And I look at the next generation of things like MEOSAR and how we're tying some of our search and rescue capabilities to the next generation of, excuse me, GNSS that are produced in the continent of North America and put on orbit. And so from a military perspective, I'm not overly concerned about the sovereignty of the constellation that we are tied to. I am very concerned about PNT denied environments. And I am very concerned about our ability to be responsive and resilient in the face of incredible challenges in PNT denied environments or GNSS denied environments. And so when I talk through kind of resilience and responsive launch, and one of those things was, hey, move something tactically in position to give us advantage. And it is not just communications, it's the ability to do advanced non-GPS precision navigation and timing, or GNSS. And it's something that different groups of people are working on now for a non-GPS based answer. The Arctic is a challenge. The Arctic is a challenge because of its orientation and the way you have to put things in orbit to support it, and for a host of other reasons. It's also incredibly cold and inhospitable, and I'm not overly worried about a land invasion through the Arctic, but I am really worried about search and rescue operations as the Northwest Passage and it becomes more navigable is the word, and tourism and other things that will create challenges on our already strained search and rescue capabilities. And so, what are the capabilities tied to GNSS or PNT that can accelerate or enable a recovery or response time or a search time is important. And I think when you tie all those things together, it leads us down the road of what space-based capabilities can be put up to support the Arctic in various ways, and PNT or GNSS is likely one of those. We're going to go right there.
Thank you very much. Space technology often moves in either a crawling pace or leaps and bounds, where we rely on TLR level 9 and 8 technology until we hit a wall that forces us to invest heavily in research and development. With the future space development that we're investing in, how open are we to new technologies and investing in those lower technology readiness levels?
So, as a guy who really wants space effects by 2028, I can tell you I'll take like TRL-6 and we'll go to town. The challenge space is that's not necessarily how the procurement system works. And so I think with the defense industrial strategy being worked on right now and some changes or procurement reform occurring right now, we'll see what comes out of that work with the new government. There is certainly a need to help defense and others accelerate procurement, but also maybe I don't need an entire 17-year major capital project designed around ISAM. Maybe I just need a prototype to prove that it's possible, and then we decide after that, prototype is launched and flown and does its rendezvous and does its deorbit that, hey, that's good, but it costs a lot of money to do this, and maybe that's not the answer. And so I look at a lot of things that we will call operational capability demonstrators at a lower TRL level, and a willingness with the RDC and research R&D communities to get to a point where we can operate prototypes versus operating long capabilities. The challenge is, my organization and others are used to replacing an airplane with an airplane. It's the newer version of the thing we did, a ship with a ship, something with a something. It's not how it works in space. We are creating capabilities that may or may not have ever existed, and that's that conceive phase and moving with technology. And I get incredibly frustrated at procurement cycles, as I'm sure a lot of us do, and I don't own the procurement system in terms of space, and so I can just be mad at others, which is also super powerful. But now I'm just an annoying guy in the corner who wants his toys and can't push through. But I think that part of the industrial strategy and part of that procurement reform is, unlocking a bit of investment capital to move forward with delivering prototypes or capability demonstrators, seeing if that's what we want, and then deciding how much further we're going to invest in that. Those are conversations we're having, because I don't want to say by the time we put something on orbit, it's already defeatable by the adversary, but because that's not really the truth. But I worry about those things. I worry about launching 1970s technology in 2025 because of the way we do that. So trying to find ways to accelerated pathways which are outside of standard procurement or with procurement reform allows us to get to those capabilities. One last question, right here.
From a regulatory perspective, one of the things I've been thinking about was IP. And even if you have a national strategy, reform procurement, we have a tendency to ship off our IP to the US or even to the EU. And even if you bring in, I guess, the incentives, I guess, how do you see Canadian businesses adapting, I guess, from your end? And do you expect that a national strategy would even, I guess, change the attitude that we have with regards to shipping our IP to the US? Because if we, or to the EU, because if we can do that, then our jobs and the actual talent won't stay. They'll just go somewhere else, and we can't grow those industries.
Yeah, so great question. And are there IP lawyers here? Any? Okay, good, because they're smart, and I'm not. I think the thing, and I'm going to answer your question in a different way. I think a national strategy for space is incredibly important, and I think it sets the vision for what we want to become as a country. And then that makes some decisions, or we can make decisions as a government and as private investors or as companies as to how much of that vision we want to chase and follow, and how much of that we want to outsource, and how much of that we want to do domestically. The tradition seems to be that, and there's a number of you in this room who I've talked to about this very thing. Hey, if you want your company to succeed, make sure you get a US buyer, because the Canadian government doesn't necessarily have a strategy in how to help you in the space domain. But I think we're going to change that. Like, I think we're on the fringes of changing that. I know that there's significant work being done to convince government to move forward with a national space strategy. And what that looks like, I mean, I have a defense perspective on that, but there are so many government agencies and departments that require that to kind of plot the vision for the future, that translates into a bit of a signal to industry and a bit of a signal to academia and a bit of a signal to everybody as Canadians as to which direction we want to take this. And then it becomes individual investment decisions on whether you wish to accelerate that and share IP or not share IP and move forward. Again, very, very biased lens from a defense perspective, but there are lots of capabilities that I would love to have as sovereign national capabilities that I could bring to bear against an adversary. But that doesn't mean that I'm not willing to partner with multiple countries to share the burden of some of those things, the cost of some of those capabilities, so that collectively, as partners and allies, we are stronger, and then that IP has to be shared. So there's a balance there, and I think that as we look to strategize for the future, that may be covered in that, but at least there's a signal to Canada and Canadians as to the direction we want to go. And with that, I'm 3 minutes and 14 seconds. I am 1 pi over my time. There's my best physics math joke of the day. Thanks so much for your time, everyone. Enjoy the conference.